Marcus Thompson stood at the back of the training ground, watching the other recruits practice their sword work with practiced ease. At 19, he was older than most of the fresh-faced young men who had joined the Royal Guard training program, and his stocky build made him look more like a baker's apprentice than a future protector of the crown. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard as Sergeant Williams barked orders at the group, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the ancient castle. The other recruits came from noble families or military backgrounds. Their fathers had been knights, their grandfathers had served kings, and they moved with the confidence that came from generations of privilege and training. Marcus, however, was the son of a blacksmith from the outer villages. His hands were calloused from years of working the forge alongside his father, and his manner of speaking marked him immediately as someone from the common folk. When Marcus had first announced his intention to join the Royal Guard, the laughter had started at home. His younger brother had snorted with amusement, asking if he planned to protect the king with a hammer and anvil. His father had been more diplomatic but equally doubtful, pointing out that the Royal Guard traditionally recruited from the aristocracy, not from families who spent their days covered in soot and sweat. The mockery had only intensified when Marcus arrived at the castle for training. The other recruits took one look at his rough appearance and simple clothes and immediately dismissed him as someone who had clearly made a mistake. They whispered among themselves, wondering aloud how someone like him had even managed to gain entry to the program. Some suggested he must have bribed someone, or perhaps there had been a clerical error. During the first week of training, Marcus struggled with the formal etiquette lessons that seemed to come naturally to his peers. He stumbled over the proper forms of address for various nobles, confused the protocols for different ceremonial occasions, and felt completely out of place during the dancing lessons that were apparently considered essential for a royal guard. The instructor, Lady Catherine, would sigh dramatically whenever Marcus made an error, which seemed to happen with alarming frequency. The physical training presented different challenges but similar results. While Marcus was certainly strong from his years at the forge, the specific skills required for swordplay and mounted combat were entirely foreign to him. The other recruits had been taking fencing lessons since childhood and could handle a blade with graceful precision. Marcus wielded his sword like he was still holding a blacksmith's hammer, swinging with power but lacking the finesse that distinguished a true swordsman. Captain Reynolds, the head of the training program, made no effort to hide his skepticism about Marcus's presence in the program. During one particularly difficult lesson, he had stopped the entire group to use Marcus as an example of what not to do. Standing before all the recruits, he had pointed out every flaw in Marcus's stance, every mistake in his technique, and every breach of protocol in his behavior. The captain's words stung worse than any physical blow Marcus had ever received at the forge. The evening meals in the Great Hall became exercises in endurance for Marcus. He would sit alone at the end of one of the long wooden tables, eating in silence while the other recruits laughed and shared stories from their privileged backgrounds. They spoke of hunting parties and court functions, of private tutors and family estates, of a world that Marcus could barely imagine, let alone participate in. Some of the recruits went beyond mere exclusion and actively tormented Marcus. They would hide his equipment before morning inspections, ensuring he would be late and face punishment. They spread rumors about his family background, claiming his father was a drunkard or that his mother had questionable morals. They imitated his accent and rough manner of speaking, turning his earnest attempts at learning into sources of entertainment. The worst of these tormentors was Lord Edmund Blackwood, a tall, handsome young man whose family had connections throughout the royal court. Edmund seemed to take particular pleasure in humiliating Marcus, often in front of the instructors. He would ask Marcus complicated questions about heraldry or court history, knowing full well that Marcus lacked the education to answer correctly. When Marcus inevitably struggled, Edmund would shake his head sadly and comment on how unfortunate it was that standards had apparently fallen so low. Despite the constant harassment and his obvious struggles, Marcus refused to quit. Each morning he rose before dawn to practice his sword work in private, determined to improve despite the lack of encouragement from anyone around him. He studied his etiquette manuals by candlelight, memorizing the complex rules that governed behavior in the royal court. He wrote letters home to his parents, carefully not mentioning the difficulties he faced, instead focusing on his determination to succeed. The instructors showed little patience for Marcus's efforts. They had expected him to wash out within the first few weeks, and his persistence seemed to annoy them rather than impress them. They graded him more harshly than the other recruits and offered none of the helpful advice or encouragement that they freely gave to the noble-born trainees. As the weeks passed, Marcus began to notice subtle changes in his own abilities. His sword work, while still lacking the elegance of his peers, was becoming more powerful and precise. His knowledge of court protocols was expanding, even if his delivery remained awkward. Most importantly, his resolve was hardening like steel in his father's forge. Every insult, every dismissive look, every moment of humiliation was adding fuel to a fire that burned deeper and stronger with each passing day. The other recruits and instructors saw only what they expected to see: a common blacksmith's son who was clearly out of his depth and would inevitably fail. They could not see the determination that was building in Marcus's heart, the careful observation he was making of everything around him, or the quiet intelligence that was slowly processing and adapting to this strange new world. What none of them realized was that Marcus Thompson possessed something that could not be taught in any academy or inherited from any noble bloodline. He had an unbreakable will and an understanding of hard work that came from a lifetime of struggle. While his tormentors saw only his rough exterior and humble origins, they were blind to the qualities that would soon shock everyone who had so casually dismissed him. 3 months into the training program, Marcus had developed a routine that kept him sane in the hostile environment of the castle. Every night after the evening meal, while the other recruits gathered in the common room to drink wine and share stories, Marcus would slip away to the castle's library. The ancient stone chamber was filled with dusty volumes on military strategy, royal history, and the art of combat, and more importantly, it was usually empty. The librarian, Brother Benedict, was an elderly monk who had served the royal family for decades. Unlike the instructors and recruits, he showed no prejudice toward Marcus's humble background. In fact, he seemed pleased to have someone showing genuine interest in the castle's extensive collection of books. Brother Benedict began staying late to help Marcus with his reading, patiently explaining difficult concepts and sharing stories from the castle's long history. Through these evening sessions, Marcus learned about famous battles, brilliant military strategies, and the true meaning of service to the crown. He discovered that many of the greatest knights in royal history had come from humble beginnings, though these stories were rarely told in the official training sessions. Brother Benedict shared tales of peasant boys who had risen to become legendary protectors of the realm, men who had proven that courage and dedication mattered more than bloodline or wealth. Meanwhile, the mockery from his fellow recruits continued to intensify. Lord Edmund had begun organizing elaborate pranks designed to humiliate Marcus in front of the instructors. One morning, Marcus discovered that someone had filled his boots with honey and feathers. Another time, he found his dress uniform had been altered to make him look ridiculous during an important inspection. The other recruits would burst into laughter whenever these pranks were revealed, while the instructors would simply shake their heads in disapproval at Marcus's apparent inability to maintain proper standards. The physical training became even more challenging as the program progressed. The recruits were now learning advanced combat techniques, mounted warfare, and tactical formations. Marcus continued to struggle with the finer points of swordplay, but his natural strength and growing determination were beginning to show results. His blade work remained unrefined, but it was becoming devastatingly effective in its simplicity and power. Captain Reynolds seemed particularly frustrated by Marcus's persistence. During one memorable training session, he had pulled Marcus aside and strongly suggested that he consider leaving the program before he embarrassed himself further. The captain explained that the Royal Guard required a certain type of person, someone who could move in high society and represent the crown with dignity and grace. He made it clear that he believed Marcus would never possess these qualities. Regardless of how hard he trained, Marcus listened to the captain's words in silence, then simply replied that he intended to complete the program. This response seemed to infuriate Captain Reynolds, who began assigning Marcus additional duties and punishments for minor infractions. Marcus found himself cleaning stables, scrubbing floors, and performing menial tasks that the other recruits were never asked to do. Each punishment was delivered with a lecture about knowing one's place and accepting one's limitations. The other recruits began to see Marcus's persistence as a form of entertainment. They would place bets on how long he would last, with most predicting he would quit before the next phase of training began. Some of the crueler recruits began suggesting ways to make his life even more miserable, viewing his suffering as the amusing diversion from their own studies. Lord Edmund escalated his harassment campaign, convinced that with enough pressure he could force Marcus to leave voluntarily. He began spreading rumors that Marcus was stealing food from the kitchens, that he was consorting with the servant girls, and that he had been heard speaking disrespectfully about the royal family. These false accusations led to formal investigations that, while ultimately proving Marcus's innocence, subjected him to intense scrutiny and additional stress. Despite these mounting pressures, Marcus continued his nightly visits to the library. Brother Benedict had begun sharing more advanced texts on military strategy and leadership, recognizing that Marcus possessed an unusual capacity for learning despite his lack of formal education. The young man absorbed these lessons with intense focus, beginning to understand the deeper principles that guided effective military leadership. During this period, Marcus also began to develop relationships with some of the castle's staff. The blacksmith, Master Gregory, was delighted to meet someone who understood the craft and would often invite Marcus to help with repairs to weapons and equipment. The stable master appreciated Marcus's genuine skill with horses, which came from his childhood spent around the working animals on his family's property. Even some of the kitchen staff began to warm to the polite young man who never put on airs despite his position as a guard trainee. These connections provided Marcus with valuable insights into the daily operations of the castle and the true character of the people who served there. He learned that many of the most competent and trustworthy individuals came from humble backgrounds similar to his own, while some of the noble-born staff members were lazy, incompetent, or corrupt. This knowledge began to reshape his understanding of what truly mattered in service to the crown. The turning point came during a particularly brutal training exercise designed to test the recruits' endurance and determination. The task involved carrying heavy equipment up the castle's tallest tower multiple times while wearing full armor. Most of the recruits struggled with the physical demands, but Marcus's years of hard labor had prepared him well for this type of challenge. While his peers collapsed from exhaustion, Marcus continued climbing, his face set in grim determination. Captain Reynolds watched this display with obvious annoyance, clearly hoping that Marcus would finally fail at something so obviously suited to physical strength. Instead, Marcus not only completed the exercise but offered to help carry equipment for some of the struggling noble recruits. This act of generosity was met with suspicion and resentment rather than gratitude, as it highlighted the weakness of those who considered themselves his superiors. That night, as Marcus made his way to the library for his usual study session, he overheard a conversation between Captain Reynolds and Lady Catherine. They were discussing the upcoming final evaluations and expressing their frustration that Marcus had not yet quit the program. Captain Reynolds was adamant that Marcus needed to be eliminated before he could embarrass the Royal Guard by actually graduating. They began planning ways to ensure his failure, regardless of his actual performance during the final tests. Marcus realized that he was facing more than just the normal challenges of training. There was an active conspiracy to destroy his chances of success, led by the very people who were supposed to be evaluating him fairly. Rather than becoming discouraged, this knowledge only strengthened his resolve. He understood now that he would need to be not just competent, but extraordinary to overcome the prejudice arrayed against him. The final month of training brought new challenges that would determine which recruits would earn their place in the Royal Guard. The upcoming evaluations would test everything, from combat skills to courtly manners, and failure in any area could result in immediate dismissal from the program. Marcus knew that the standards applied to him would be far harsher than those applied to his noble-born peers, but he had spent months preparing for this moment. Brother Benedict had become an invaluable ally during these final weeks. The elderly monk had access to records of previous examinations and quietly shared information about what the evaluators would be looking for. He helped Marcus practice his formal speech patterns, corrected his posture during ceremonial procedures, and even taught him some of the subtle courtly mannerisms that could make the difference between acceptance and rejection. Master Gregory, the castle blacksmith, had also become an unexpected mentor. He had been observing Marcus's progress with professional interest, and was impressed by the young man's dedication and natural ability. During their conversations, Master Gregory revealed that he had once served as a guard himself before an injury forced him to take up smithing. He shared practical advice about combat techniques and survival skills that were never taught in the formal training sessions. The other recruits seemed increasingly confident as the evaluations approached. Lord Edmund had organized study groups that deliberately excluded Marcus, ensuring that he would not benefit from the collective knowledge and preparation strategies that the noble recruits shared among themselves. They continued their campaign of harassment, but their methods had become more subtle and calculated to avoid detection by the instructors. Captain Reynolds announced that the final evaluations would consist of 5 major components: individual combat assessment, mounted warfare demonstration, written examination on military history and strategy, formal presentation to a panel of senior officers, and a practical leadership exercise. Each component would be graded independently, and recruits needed to pass all 5 areas to graduate from the program. The combat assessment was scheduled first, and Marcus spent every spare moment practicing his sword work. His technique had improved dramatically over the months of training, though it retained the powerful, straightforward style that reflected his blacksmith background. While other recruits focused on flashy maneuvers designed to impress the evaluators, Marcus concentrated on developing techniques that would be effective in real combat situations. On the morning of the combat evaluation, Marcus noticed that his practice sword had been damaged overnight. The blade was loose in the hilt, making it dangerous to use during sparring matches. He suspected sabotage but had no way to prove it. Master Gregory quickly repaired the weapon, but the incident served as a reminder that Marcus's enemies were willing to resort to any means to ensure his failure. The combat assessment took place in the main courtyard before an audience of instructors and senior guards. Each recruit was required to demonstrate their skills against multiple opponents in a series of increasingly difficult scenarios. When Marcus's turn came, he faced the evaluation with calm determination, drawing on months of practice and the practical knowledge he had gained from his conversations with experienced fighters. His performance shocked everyone present. While his style lacked the elegant flourishes favored by the academy-trained fighters, it was brutally effective. Marcus moved with surprising speed for someone of his build, and his strikes carried devastating power. He defeated each opponent decisively, showing not just technical skill but tactical awareness and adaptability. Even Captain Reynolds could not hide his surprise at the display of competence. The mounted warfare demonstration proved equally impressive. Marcus's childhood experience with working horses gave him a natural advantage in this area. While other recruits struggled to control their mounts while wielding weapons, Marcus moved with his horse as if they were a single entity. His performance during the mounted combat scenarios was so superior that even Lord Edmund's supporters had to acknowledge his skill. The written examination presented different challenges. Marcus had spent countless hours in the library studying military history and strategy, but he knew that his answers would be scrutinized more carefully than those of the other recruits. He approached each question methodically, drawing on the extensive knowledge he had gained through his sessions with Brother Benedict. His responses demonstrated not just memorized facts, but genuine understanding of complex strategic principles. During the formal presentation phase, Marcus faced a panel of senior officers who had clearly been briefed about his background. Their questions were more challenging and hostile than those posed to other recruits. They questioned his motivations, his loyalty, and his ability to serve effectively among his social betters. Marcus answered each inquiry with honest dignity, neither apologizing for his origins nor claiming to be something he was not. The leadership exercise proved to be the most revealing component of the evaluation. Each recruit was given command of a small unit of junior guards and tasked with completing a simulated mission. This test was designed to assess decision-making ability, communication skills, and the capacity to inspire others under pressure. Marcus's turn came last, after he had observed the performance of all the other recruits. He had noticed that most of them had treated the exercise as an opportunity to demonstrate their authority, rather than their leadership. They had issued commands without explanation, ignored input from their subordinates, and focused more on appearing impressive than on achieving their objectives effectively. When Marcus took command of his unit, he began by learning the names and backgrounds of each guard under his command. He explained the mission clearly, and asked for suggestions based on their experience and local knowledge. This approach initially confused the guards, who were accustomed to the more authoritarian style displayed by the noble recruits, but they quickly responded to Marcus's genuine respect for their expertise. The mission involved rescuing a captured diplomat from a fortified position while avoiding civilian casualties and minimizing damage to the surrounding area. Marcus's approach was methodical and inclusive, incorporating suggestions from his team members and adapting his strategy based on changing conditions during the exercise. His unit completed the mission more efficiently and with fewer casualties than any of the previous groups. The evaluating officers were clearly surprised by Marcus's performance during the leadership exercise. They had expected him to fail in this area, assuming that someone from his background would lack the natural authority needed to command others. Instead, they witnessed a display of authentic leadership that contrasted sharply with the superficial command style exhibited by the noble recruits. As the evaluations concluded, Marcus felt cautiously optimistic about his performance. He had exceeded expectations in every area and demonstrated capabilities that even his harshest critics could not easily dismiss. However, he also understood that the final decision would involve more than just objective assessment of his abilities. The politics and prejudices that had shaped his entire training experience would likely influence the outcome of the evaluations. The results would be announced in 3 days, giving the evaluation committee time to review all the assessments and make their final determinations. During this waiting period, the atmosphere among the recruits became increasingly tense. Some, like Lord Edmund, seemed supremely confident of their success, while others worried about their performance in specific areas. Marcus spent these days in quiet preparation for whatever outcome awaited him, continuing his studies and maintaining the disciplined routine that had sustained him throughout the training program. The 3 days of waiting felt like an eternity to Marcus. While other recruits spent the time celebrating what they assumed would be their inevitable success, Marcus maintained his usual routine of study and practice. He continued his evening visits to the library, though Brother Benedict had noticed a change in the young man's demeanor. The monk could see that months of constant pressure and hostility had taken their toll, even on someone as resilient as Marcus. On the second day of waiting, an unexpected visitor arrived at the castle. Sir William Ashford, the king's personal champion and commander of the elite Royal Guard units, had come to observe the final selections personally. His presence sent ripples of excitement and nervousness throughout the castle, as having such a distinguished figure witness the graduation ceremony was unprecedented. Sir William was a legendary figure, known throughout the kingdom for his military prowess and unwavering loyalty to the crown. He had risen from relatively modest origins himself, though few people remembered this aspect of his background. His reputation was built on actions rather than ancestry, and he was respected by both nobles and commoners alike for his fairness and competence. The announcement of results was scheduled for the following morning in the Great Hall. Captain Reynolds would read the names of successful candidates, who would then take their oath of service before Sir William and the assembled court officials. For those who failed, there would be no ceremony, just a quiet dismissal and the long journey home to face family and friends who had expected their success. That final evening, Marcus made his usual trip to the library, but found Brother Benedict waiting with an unusual expression of concern. The elderly monk had heard rumors from the kitchen staff about the evaluation committee's deliberations. According to these whispers, there was significant disagreement among the evaluators about Marcus's fate. While his performance had been undeniably impressive, some committee members argued that his background made him unsuitable for service in the Royal Guard regardless of his abilities. Brother Benedict revealed that Captain Reynolds had been lobbying aggressively against Marcus's acceptance, claiming that allowing a blacksmith's son into the Royal Guard would lower the prestige of the entire organization. Lady Catherine had supported this position, arguing that Marcus's lack of refined manners would embarrass the crown during formal occasions. However, some of the military instructors had argued forcefully in favor of Marcus's acceptance, pointing to his exceptional performance during the practical evaluations. The monk also shared more encouraging news. Sir William had apparently requested detailed reports on all the recruits' performances and had asked specific questions about Marcus's background and evaluation scores. This level of personal interest from such a senior figure suggested that Marcus's achievements had not gone unnoticed at the highest levels of the organization. Sleep came fitfully to Marcus that night. He lay on his narrow bed in the recruits' dormitory, listening to the confident conversations of his fellow trainees who seemed certain of their success. Lord Edmund was already planning his first assignment and discussing which royal functions he hoped to attend as a newly commissioned guard. The casual assumption of success that characterized these conversations only highlighted how different Marcus's experience had been throughout the training program. Morning arrived gray and overcast, with a cold wind blowing across the castle walls. The recruits assembled in the Great Hall, wearing their best uniforms and trying to project confidence despite their underlying nervousness. Marcus took his place at the back of the group, as had become his habit throughout the training program. He noticed that several senior officers he did not recognize had joined the usual assembly of instructors and administrators. Sir William entered the hall precisely at the appointed time, his presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone present. He was smaller in stature than Marcus had expected, but he carried himself with an authority that filled the room. His weathered face showed the scars of many battles, and his eyes held the sharp intelligence that had made him one of the kingdom's most respected military leaders. Captain Reynolds began the ceremony with a speech about the honor and responsibility of service in the Royal Guard. He spoke about the noble traditions of the organization and the high standards expected of those who would protect the royal family. As he talked, Marcus noticed that the captain's eyes frequently drifted in his direction, and there was something in his expression that suggested the outcome might not be what everyone expected. The moment of truth arrived as Captain Reynolds began reading the names of successful candidates. The first few names were exactly what everyone had anticipated: sons of noble families who had performed adequately during training and possessed the social connections that traditionally guaranteed acceptance. Each name was greeted with polite applause from the assembled observers. Lord Edmund's name was called fifth, and he stepped forward with obvious satisfaction to receive his commission. His supporters in the audience applauded enthusiastically, and he acknowledged their approval with a confident smile. Marcus felt no surprise at this outcome, despite Edmund's mediocre performance during several of the practical evaluations. Political connections had always been more important than actual competence in such matters. As the list continued, Marcus noticed that some names he had expected to hear were not being called. Several recruits who had seemed certain of success were still standing in the group of candidates, their confidence beginning to waver as the reality of failure set in. The selection process was apparently more competitive than anyone had realized. When Captain Reynolds reached the end of his prepared list, 12 names had been called from the original group of 20 recruits. Marcus was not among them, and he felt a familiar mixture of disappointment and resignation. He had known that his chances were limited regardless of his performance, and the outcome confirmed his worst expectations about the role of prejudice in the selection process. However, Sir William then stepped forward and asked to address the assembly. This was clearly not part of the planned ceremony, as Captain Reynolds looked surprised and somewhat uncomfortable. The King's champion spoke in a clear, authoritative voice that carried easily throughout the Great Hall. Sir William announced that he had reviewed all the evaluation reports personally and had identified one additional candidate who merited acceptance based on exceptional performance during testing. He explained that this recruit had demonstrated not only superior skills in all practical areas but also the kind of authentic leadership that the Royal Guard needed to maintain its effectiveness and honor. The hall fell completely silent as Sir William paused dramatically before continuing his announcement. He spoke about the importance of merit over privilege, of character over connections, and of the Royal Guard's responsibility to represent the best of the kingdom's values rather than just its social elite. His words carried implicit criticism of the selection process that had nearly excluded someone based on prejudice rather than performance. Then Sir William spoke Marcus's name, calling him forward to receive his commission as a member of the Royal Guard. The silence in the hall was deafening, broken only by the sound of Marcus's footsteps as he walked toward the front of the assembly. He could feel the shocked stares of everyone present, but he kept his eyes focused on Sir William's encouraging expression. As Marcus knelt to receive his oath of service, He caught a glimpse of Captain Reynolds' face, which showed a mixture of anger and humiliation. Lord Edmund and the other noble recruits looked stunned, unable to comprehend how someone they had dismissed and tormented could have achieved the recognition they believed belonged exclusively to them. The moment represented not just personal vindication for Marcus, but a fundamental challenge to the assumptions that had governed the Royal Guard for generations. The aftermath of the commissioning ceremony created waves of shock and controversy throughout the castle. As Marcus rose from his knees after taking the oath of service, he could see the stunned expressions on faces throughout the Great Hall. Sir William had not merely accepted him into the Royal Guard. He had made a public statement about merit versus privilege that challenged the entire social order of the organization. In the days following the ceremony, Marcus found himself in an entirely new position within the castle hierarchy. As a commissioned Royal Guard, he was technically equal in rank to Lord Edmund and the other noble recruits who had also been accepted. However, the social dynamics remained complicated and often hostile. His former tormentors now had to address him with the respect due to his rank, but their resentment was obvious in every interaction. Sir William requested a private meeting with Marcus on his third day as a commissioned guard. The King's Champion received him in his personal chambers, a spartanly furnished room that reflected its occupant's practical nature. The walls were decorated with weapons and battle standards rather than ornate tapestries, and the furniture was solid and functional rather than decorative. During their conversation, Sir William revealed that he had been watching Marcus's progress throughout the training program. Reports of the harassment and prejudice had reached him through unofficial channels, and he had been curious to see how the young man would respond to such challenges. Marcus's persistence and growing competence had impressed him, but it was the leadership evaluation that had convinced him to intervene personally in the selection process. Sir, William explained that the Royal Guard faced challenges that required more than just social polish and traditional breeding. The kingdom was changing, and the Guard needed members who could connect with people from all walks of life, who understood real hardship, and who possessed the genuine courage that came from overcoming adversity. He believed that Marcus represented exactly the kind of person the organization needed for its future effectiveness. The conversation also touched on the practical realities of Marcus's new position. Sir William warned him that the prejudice and hostility he had experienced during training would likely continue in different forms throughout his career. However, he also promised that competence and dedication would eventually earn Marcus the respect he deserved, even from those who initially opposed his presence in the Guard. Marcus's first assignment was to the castle's internal security detail, working under Sergeant Major Harrison, a gruff veteran who had served in the Royal Guard for over 20 years. Harrison had a reputation for being demanding but fair, and he was known for judging his subordinates based on their performance rather than their backgrounds. This assignment was clearly intended to give Marcus a chance to prove himself in a relatively supportive environment. The work itself was less glamorous than Marcus had imagined during his months of training. Much of his time was spent on routine patrols, checking security protocols and maintaining equipment. However, he approached these duties with the same dedication he had shown during training, earning grudging respect from the veteran guards who worked alongside him. Sergeant Major Harrison proved to be an excellent mentor for Marcus's transition into active service. The older man had also risen from humble origins, though his background was military rather than civilian. He understood the challenges that Marcus faced and provided practical advice about navigating the complex social dynamics of the Royal Guard while maintaining focus on professional responsibilities. Under Harrison's guidance, Marcus began to develop his skills in areas that had not been covered during formal training. He learned about intelligence gathering, threat assessment, and the subtle art of reading people's intentions and motivations. These skills proved invaluable in his security work, where the ability to identify potential problems before they became actual threats was essential. The other guards in Marcus's unit initially maintained a cautious distance, unsure how to relate to someone who had achieved his position under such unusual circumstances. However, his competence and reliability gradually broke down these barriers when Marcus volunteered for unpopular assignments, helped his colleagues with difficult tasks, and demonstrated his commitment to the unit's success. He began to earn genuine acceptance from his peers. Lord Edmund and several other noble guards made occasional attempts to undermine Marcus's position through complaints and subtle sabotage. They would question his decisions during joint operations, spread rumors about his competence, and try to exclude him from informal gatherings where important information was often shared. However, these efforts were less effective than their harassment had been during training, partly because Marcus now had allies who were willing to defend him. The turning point in Marcus's acceptance came during a routine patrol that uncovered evidence of a serious security breach. While checking the castle's outer defenses, Marcus noticed signs that someone had been attempting to map the guard rotations and identify weak points in the perimeter. His careful investigation revealed a sophisticated espionage operation that could have compromised the safety of the royal family. Marcus's discovery and his methodical approach to documenting the evidence impressed both his immediate supervisors and the senior command structure. The threat was neutralized before it could develop into an actual attack, and Marcus received formal commendation for his alertness and professionalism. This recognition helped establish his credibility with guards who had previously questioned his qualifications. The success also brought Marcus to the attention of other senior officers who began to see him as a valuable asset rather than an unwelcome intruder. His combination of practical intelligence, attention to detail, and genuine dedication to protecting the royal family made him exactly the kind of guard that experienced commanders wanted on their teams, brother. Benedict continued to serve as an informal advisor and friend during this period of transition. The elderly monk was delighted by Marcus's success and took pride in having helped him develop the knowledge and confidence needed to excel in his new role. Their evening conversations in the library continued, though now they focused more on the practical challenges of leadership and service rather than basic academic preparation. Master Gregory also remained a supportive presence in Marcus's life. The blacksmith was pleased to see that his young friend had not forgotten his roots despite his elevation in status. Marcus continued to help with equipment maintenance when his duties permitted, and these sessions provided him with a connection to his previous life that helped keep him grounded and humble. As Marcus established himself in his new role, he began to understand that his success represented more than just personal achievement. Other guards from non-noble backgrounds watched his progress with interest, seeing him as proof that merit could triumph over prejudice in the royal guard. This responsibility weighed heavily on Marcus, who realized that his actions would influence opportunities for others who might follow a similar path. The months following his commissioning also brought personal growth that went beyond professional development. Marcus's confidence increased as he proved his worth repeatedly, but he also learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of the castle with greater sophistication. He remained true to his values and background while adapting to the requirements of his new position. 6 months after his commissioning, Marcus faced his first major test as a royal guard when King Edward announced a diplomatic visit from the neighboring kingdom of Eldoria. The visit would require extensive security preparations, ceremonial duties, and coordination between multiple guard units. For Marcus, it represented an opportunity to prove himself on the kind of high-profile assignment that defined a guard's career. The preparation process revealed both the progress Marcus had made and the challenges that remained. While his professional competence was no longer questioned by his immediate colleagues, some of the senior officers still harbored doubts about his suitability for such an important assignment. Captain Reynolds, who had never forgiven the humiliation of Marcus's acceptance into the guard, argued that someone with such limited experience in court protocols should not be included in the diplomatic security detail. However, Sergeant Major Harrison and several other respected officers advocated strongly for Marcus's inclusion. They pointed to his exceptional performance during routine security operations and his demonstrated ability to identify potential threats that others had missed. Sir William ultimately settled the debate by personally assigning Marcus to the diplomatic security team, stating that the guard needed officers who could think beyond conventional approaches. The Eldorian delegation arrived on a crisp autumn morning, bringing with them not only diplomats and nobles, but also their own security personnel, who would need to be coordinated with the Royal Guard's efforts. The visitors were led by Prince Victor of Aldoria, a man known for his military background and sharp political mind. The diplomatic meetings would span 5 days and include formal banquets, private negotiations, and ceremonial events that would test every aspect of the security arrangements. Marcus was assigned to the perimeter security team, responsible for monitoring potential external threats and coordinating with the Eldorian guards. This role required him to work closely with foreign security personnel, many of whom had their own preconceptions about the Royal Guard's capabilities and professionalism. His assignment to this position was partly a test of his diplomatic skills and ability to maintain security cooperation under challenging circumstances. On the first day of the visit, Marcus encountered Captain Mikhail Volkov, the head of Prince Victor's personal guard. Volkov was a seasoned military officer who had fought in several border conflicts and possessed a reputation for ruthless efficiency. He looked at Marcus with obvious skepticism, clearly questioning whether someone so young could be trusted with serious security responsibilities. The Eldorian captain made several pointed comments about the Royal Guard's reliance on ceremony over substance. Rather than taking offense at Volkov's implied criticisms, Marcus chose to demonstrate his competence through actions. He provided detailed briefings on the castle's security measures, shared intelligence about potential local threats, and proposed coordination protocols that would maximize the effectiveness of both security teams. His professional approach and obvious preparation gradually earned Volkov's grudging respect. The real test came on the second evening of the visit, during a formal banquet in the Great Hall. Marcus was stationed in the castle's outer courtyard, monitoring access points and coordinating patrol schedules. As the evening progressed, he noticed unusual activity near the castle's eastern wall. A group of servants who should have completed their duties hours earlier were still moving through the area, and their behavior seemed suspicious to his trained eye. Marcus's investigation revealed that the servants were actually disguised infiltrators who had somehow obtained authentic uniforms and identification. They were attempting to plant listening devices in key locations throughout the castle, apparently hoping to gather intelligence about the diplomatic negotiations. The sophistication of their operations suggested backing from a hostile foreign power, making the security breach far more serious than a simple criminal endeavor. Working quickly and quietly, Marcus coordinated with both his Royal Guard colleagues and Captain Volkov's team to surround and capture the infiltrators without disrupting the ongoing banquet. The operation required precise timing and seamless cooperation between the two security forces. Marcus's careful planning and clear communication proved essential to the mission's success, as any mistake could have resulted in violence that would have embarrassed both kingdoms. The capture of the spy ring sent shockwaves through both delegations. Prince Victor was impressed by the professionalism and effectiveness of the security response, particularly given the complex coordination required between different forces. He made a point of personally thanking Marcus for his vigilance and quick thinking, noting that such competence was exactly what he expected from the legendary Royal Guard. Captain Volkov's attitude toward Marcus underwent a complete transformation following the incident. The Eldorian officer who had initially dismissed Marcus as inexperienced now sought his advice on security matters and praised his tactical thinking. During a private conversation, Volkov admitted that he had misjudged Marcus based on his age and had not expected such sophisticated threat assessment from someone so early in his career. The success of the operation also vindicated Sir William's decision to include Marcus in the diplomatic security detail. Senior officers who had questioned his readiness for such responsibility were forced to acknowledge that his performance had been exemplary. Even Captain Reynolds, Marcus's longtime nemesis, grudgingly admitted that the young guard had exceeded expectations during the crisis. The remaining days of the diplomatic visit proceeded without incident, but Marcus's reputation within the Royal Guard was permanently enhanced by his handling of the security breach. Word of his success spread throughout the castle, and guards who had previously viewed him with suspicion now spoke of him with respect. His ability to work effectively with foreign security personnel also marked him as someone with potential for future diplomatic assignments. The Eldorian delegation's departure marked the end of a successful diplomatic mission, but for Marcus it represented the beginning of a new phase in his career. Sir William called him for another private meeting, this time to discuss expanded responsibilities and potential advancement opportunities. The king's champion explained that Marcus had demonstrated exactly the kind of thinking and leadership that the royal guard needed for its continued evolution. During their conversation, Sir William revealed that the spy ring's infiltration had been more sophisticated than anyone had initially realized. The investigation that followed Marcus's discovery uncovered a broader intelligence network that had been operating within the kingdom for months. Marcus's alertness had prevented not just a single breach of security, but had disrupted an entire espionage operation that could have compromised national security. The recognition that followed this revelation brought Marcus to the attention of the highest levels of government. Royal advisors who had never heard of the blacksmith's son now knew his name and valued his contributions to the kingdom's safety. This visibility opened doors to opportunities that would have been unimaginable just months earlier, when he was struggling to survive the harassment of his training program. Brother Benedict and Master Gregory shared in Marcus's success, taking pride in their roles as mentors and friends during his difficult early months at the castle. The elderly monk had always believed in Marcus's potential, while the blacksmith had provided practical wisdom that proved invaluable during the young man's transformation from village craftsman to elite royal protector. 2 years after his controversial acceptance into the royal guard, Marcus stood before King Edward himself in the private chamber where the most sensitive matters of state were discussed. The young man who had once been dismissed as a blacksmith's son with impossible dreams was now being briefed on threats to the kingdom that required his specialized expertise to address. The transformation in Marcus's status had been gradual but undeniable. His success during the Aldorian diplomatic crisis had led to additional high-profile assignments, each of which he had handled with the same combination of competence and integrity that had become his trademark. Word of his abilities had spread beyond the castle walls, reaching the attention of nobles and military commanders throughout the kingdom who valued substance over social credentials. King Edward proved to be a ruler who appreciated merit wherever he found it. During their first personal meeting, the king had questioned Marcus extensively about his background, his motivations for joining the royal guard, and his vision for the organization's future. Marcus answered honestly, neither exaggerating his achievements nor downplaying his humble origins. The king was impressed by this straightforward approach and began to rely on Marcus for assessments that required both tactical expertise and authentic understanding of common people's concerns. The assignment that brought Marcus to the king's private chamber involved a threat that combined political conspiracy with foreign interference. Intelligence reports suggested that discontented nobles were planning to use an upcoming royal progress through the countryside as an opportunity to stage some form of dramatic protest, or worse. The conspirators appeared to have support from hostile foreign agents, who hoped to destabilize the kingdom through internal conflict. Marcus was chosen to lead the advanced security team for the royal progress, a responsibility that would have been unthinkable for someone of his background just a few years earlier. His selection over several more senior officers with noble pedigrees sent clear signals about how much his stock had risen within the organization. The appointment also demonstrated the king's confidence in his judgment and abilities. The assignment required Marcus to travel throughout the proposed route of the royal progress, assessing security threats and coordinating with local authorities who might not initially trust someone so young and apparently common-born. His success would depend not just on his tactical skills, but on his ability to build relationships with provincial nobles and military commanders who had their own prejudices and agendas. Marcus's approach to this challenge drew on everything he had learned during his rise through the royal guard. He combined thorough preparation with genuine respect for the local knowledge and concerns of the people he worked with. Rather than arriving with predetermined assumptions about security arrangements, he listened carefully to local officials and incorporated their insights into his planning. The investigation that followed revealed a conspiracy more complex and dangerous than anyone had initially suspected. Several prominent nobles were indeed planning to use the royal progress as cover for a coup attempt, supported by foreign gold and promises of military assistance. The plot involved not just political opposition, but actual plans for violence that could have resulted in the king's death and plunged the kingdom into civil war. Marcus's careful work uncovered the full extent of the conspiracy and identified all the major participants before they could put their plans into action. His investigation techniques, developed through years of practical experience, proved more effective than the traditional approaches favored by his noble colleagues. He understood how to gather intelligence from servants and commoners, who were often invisible to aristocratic conspirators but who observed everything that happened around them. The successful disruption of the coup attempt represented a triumph not just for Marcus personally, but for the principle that competence should be valued over social status. The king publicly praised Marcus's work and awarded him honors that placed him among the most respected members of the royal guard. These recognitions carried weight throughout the kingdom, establishing Marcus as a figure whose opinions and recommendations commanded serious attention. Lord Edmund and the other noble guards, who had once tormented Marcus, now found themselves in the awkward position of serving under someone they had dismissed as inferior. The irony was not lost on anyone who had witnessed their earlier behavior. Some adapted to the new reality with grace, recognizing that their initial prejudices had been wrong. Others remained resentful but were forced to conceal their feelings behind a facade of professional respect. Captain Reynolds faced a particularly difficult adjustment to Marcus's rise. The officer who had once tried to force Marcus out of the training program now reported to him on certain assignments. Reynolds eventually requested a transfer to a different unit, unable to reconcile his prejudices with the reality of Marcus's success. His departure removed one of the last institutional barriers to Marcus's full acceptance within the organization. The broader impact of Marcus's success extended far beyond his personal advancement. Other guards from non-noble backgrounds found that their own opportunities were expanding as the organization began to place greater emphasis on merit and competence. The Royal Guard was slowly transforming from an exclusive club for aristocrats into a truly professional force that drew talent from all levels of society. Sir William watched these changes with satisfaction, knowing that his decision to intervene in Marcus's favor had catalyzed improvements that strengthened the entire organization. The King's Champion had always believed that the Royal Guard's effectiveness depended on attracting the best people, regardless of their origins, and Marcus's success provided compelling evidence for this philosophy. Brother Benedict and Master Gregory remained important figures in Marcus's life, providing continuity with his origins and reminding him of the values that had guided his rise. The elderly monk continued to serve as a source of wisdom and perspective, while the blacksmith represented the honest craftsmanship and dedication that remained at the core of Marcus's character. As Marcus stood in the king's chamber, receiving briefings on matters that would shape the future of the kingdom, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The mockery and humiliation he had endured during training seemed like events from another lifetime, though the lessons he had learned from those experiences continued to guide his approach to leadership and service. The blacksmith's son, who had been deemed unworthy of the Royal Guard, had become one of its most valued members, proving that determination and character could overcome any obstacle. His story had become an inspiration to others who faced similar prejudices and barriers, demonstrating that excellence could not be contained by artificial social boundaries. King Edward's confidence in Marcus represented more than just recognition of individual achievement. It symbolized a broader transformation in how the kingdom identified and developed talent, moving away from rigid class distinctions toward a more meritocratic approach that promised to strengthen the realm for generations to come. Marcus's unlikely journey from village forge to royal service had shocked the experts and changed the very nature of what it meant to serve the crown.